Good afternoon, everyone. Happy New Year. This is our first episode of 2026. And yeah, I really hope everybody had a great year. 2025 has been really harsh in every sense for Congolese people, for myself, and I'm sure for yourself as well, for you. But I just hope that in 2026 that you are going to persevere, that you are not going to give up whatever goals that you have for this year, that you must achieve them. So happy New Year! I'm really glad to be here with you every weekends. First episode of 2026, January 3rd, and we're gonna discuss about the Congo. About we're gonna go a little bit to the Latin continent as well. Talk about Venezuela, talk about what it means in comparison to the Congo, right? So today, episodes from Congo to Venezuela, sovereignty, selective justice, and the price of independence. What that really means. In the month of January, just to get started, um, for Congolese people, for Friends of the Congo, is not an ordinary month, and I need to say that. And actually, um, a few days ago, I think it was on January 1st, we launched officially our 17 days before heading to January 17th, which commemorates the murder or the death of Patrice Lumumba, who is the very first prime minister that the Congo has known. And the Friends of the Congo, we really like to um, remember the man, not just because he was the first democratically elected leader of the Congo, but because of what he represented in terms of independence, in terms of sovereignty and being free from imperialism, free from colonialism, in having the Congolese people being able to take control of their own affairs. And there is a significance in Lumumba's life, and even right after his death, he had he's made a lot way more impacts after his death that even when he was alive, which is really incredible when you think about somebody's legacy, right? That that if the Congolese elites at the time, that if the United States and Belgium did not really uh, um, worked so hard to kill the man, maybe we wouldn't have not talked about him the way that we're doing right now. So, but it's really like I'm saying that January, the month of January, is not an ordinary month for us. It is a month of memory, a month of reckoning. Um, and also a month for Congolese people to remember, not just Patrice Lumumba. There's also Mamadou Ndala, who is was a colonel of the Congolese army, who was also assassinated. He was killed a few years ago on January 2nd. Um, so yesterday, I think the some Congolese people in the diaspora in the Congo and even the Congolese government kind of also honored the man, um, because that was the man that essentially led the army as a colonel, right? He led the Congolese army together with the United Nations and the South African forces to defeat the very first version of the M23, because the M23 did not appear in 2025, right? The M23 existed since I think the creation of the M23 was 2013, 2012 officially. But when you actually go back in history, the history of the movement, of the organization, Mouvement du 23 Mars, the 23rd March movement. So it was a movement that was created at the aftermath of an agreement that was signed between the Congolese government and the CNDP at the time, another Rwandan-backed militia. and they signed an agreements, and they were asking for a lot of things. That They were asking for a complete pardon, like immunity for all of them. That the return of alleged refugees, Congolese refugees living in Rwanda, that has been kind of like the narrative for decades now. And also they wanted to be inserted in the Congolese um, army, right? That those fighters wanted to be part of the Congolese army. They wanted to be part of the political apparatus system of the Congo. When we know, because it has been documented, that some of them, if not most of them, most of those soldiers or those officers, high-ranking officers, were involved in war crimes, were involved in crimes against humanity. So obviously that creates some sort of fuse between the Congolese government and Rwanda, aka M23, and then that's when the movement was created. So Mamadou Ndala, who was colonel of the Congolese army, he led in a really courageous way to the defeat of the M23. Obviously, the U.S. also play a part with the sanction, not necessarily the U.S., but the people, you all. A few years ago, the same campaign asking for the U.S. to finally implement its own law, Public Law 109456, Section 105, that ask for the U.S. Secretary of State to withdraw any aid available to any government that is deemed that has been found essentially guilty of destabilizing the Congo. So at that time, there was so many evidence, just like we have had for the past few years now, about Rwanda. So there were sanctions. The U.S. withdrew some money to the Rwandan government, and then the World Bank followed, and then the IMF, and that essentially depleted financially the M23, that run back militia, and the M23, the Congolese government, then led by Mamadou Ndala, um, were able to organize a resistance, and were able to defeat in conjunction with the United Nations, like I mentioned. So there was January 2nd, Mamadou Ndala, and we start the year like that. The Congolese people start the year like that now. But for over decades now, Friends of the Congo has been really focusing on Lumumba because of who he incarnates, who we represent. And so January is when Congolese people, when Friends of the Congo remembers Patrice Lumumba. And something very interesting about Patrice Lumumba, and I did mention that he was, you see, um, Lumumba, like I mentioned earlier, the very first democratically elected leader of the Congo, that was literally had just gotten its independence from Belgium, and it was not something given. And even his speech when he became when he went at the independence, his speech was not even planned, and he literally just got up and went up stage and off, like it's not something scripted, and he took the mic after the president of the Congo at the time because they really wanted the Belgium and the US and the West at the time wanted to really keep control of the Congo. So you don't want to have a figure like Lumumba to lead the country. So that's why last minute they created this structure or government system with a president that will be the face, that will be speaking on behalf of the country, and then somebody will actually be leading. So the president, Kasavubu, had just given a speech essentially thanking the King Leopold, the King Baudouin at the time, about uh, whatever they were thanking him about. And that's when, after that, Lumumba got up and he went there and he reminded the Belgian folks, he reminded the Congolese people that the independence that the Congolese people got where was not something given, that it was something fought. Um, so he did not die uh, in a really quiet manners. He was really eliminated. They really made sure that people knew that Lumumba was killed and that they knew how he was killed. Even kept the tooth, right, of Lumumba as a trophy. Um, and he was killed. Why was he murdered? And I keep saying that Lumumba was murdered because of what he stood for, and he stood for sovereignty. He stood for the ability of indigenous people to disrupt the establishment, to disrupt the colonial power at the time. And this January is even heavier than most because yes, Friends of the Congo will be paying tribute for the next few days now up until January 17th. We're paying tribute to Lumumba. But we're also doing that while there is the African Cup unfolding, African Cup nations, and really I really want you to stay with me on that because there is very something interesting when you look at the history of the Congo, when you look at what's going on, and I actually believe that the final will be around Mulumba commemoration, which will be really interesting if um, it will be the day after January 18th. But can you imagine if the Congo had to make it to the final, all the way to the final, if not even winning? That would be very interesting, right? So there is the African Cup happening right now, and then there is the Congolese national team that is competing, and they actually have for the very first time since 1974, they have a shot to the World Cup, and they are playing the last game in the qualifier in Mexico in March. Um, but the reason why I'm mentioning that because we are really witnessing something deeper than football, something deeper than soccer for those who live in the U.S. Um, because uh, we're talking about a country that has known again decades of aggression, right? Decades, literally decades of aggression from its neighbor because of obviously the resources that the Congolese activists in UK frame it as the Genocost years ago, genocide for economic gain, and how the Congolese people are being displaced, how the Congolese people are being slaughtered, how women are being raped, right? Dr. Mukwege, the 2018 Nobel Peace Prize, talks about rape as a weapon of war, right? Because you really want to create that fear within women, within the household, within the community, and show that the men that are supposed to be protecting those women are incapable. They do not have the strength or the power to do that. Then that pushes the families to be broken and even to leave those areas. So creating fear, killing, displacing folks. Um, and we also talking the history with colonialism, as I mentioned, that Lumumba fought along with his comrades, and even before that, with the how essentially the United States, which was the very first country to recognize the Congo Free State as King Leopold II's personal property, with the millions of Congolese people living in it. And that happened because the US was able to give the okay that it is okay for a man to be facilitating the plunder of the Congo. It is okay for a man to be owning an entire country with his people as his personal property. And that was at the at the Berlin Conference, right? So you have all these history from 1884 all the way to 2025, and you look at the significance of those dates, of those events, and then you look at the Congolese team almost making it to the World Cup. The Congolese team at the African Cup nations now, and there is even a talk regarding this particular fan that has been essentially standing for the entire time. There was actually maybe a video. Let me see if I can uh, show that like essentially just standing, right? And imitating Patrice Lumumba, and you can see almost the resemblance that how he can stand tall and show his hands the entire time that the Congolese people are playing. So I think it's very important to recognize that. And I think I have the videos somewhere. Let me just put that on this one.
A quick question of what happens in 2026. And there's a man who pays tribute to late Patrice Lumumba, stands that way the entire match.
Yeah.
Motionless. It's a very glowing homage that he pays.
I hope people are able to hear that. But again, very interesting, right? To have someone that decides to support the Congo, a Congolese, and he's like, I'm going to support the Congo in a way that is going to be true to me, true to us, and dress as Patrice Lumumba. And that's why I was saying that this is really deeper than football, really deeper than soccer, because we are witnessing here a whole symbol, right? And we are witness also in a sense, right? Contradiction. And also the question that Lumumba still asks, because Lumumba, he represents sovereignty, he represents legitimacy. He was elected, right? And he fought hard, and that even cost his life for the independence of the Congo. So the legitimacy here that we should be asking, and that's a question that Lumumba asked in 1960, that we all have to answer, is who decides legitimacy in the Congo, right? And the DRC in that regards competing at the African Cup of Nations, while you know part of its territory literally remains under occupations, while civilians, and I mentioned in the Kivu, endure massacre, massive displacements, and even silence from the international community in that regards, because no sanctions against Rwanda, and we have assisted instead of agreements, providing carte blanche to Rwanda to exploit Congolese minerals, right? And yes, that's the key question. And we were provided with an agreement that gives carte blanche to Rwanda to exploit the minerals, no accountability. And I had brother Kambale a few weeks ago talking to us in a very inspirational way, in a way that he only knows, regarding the mechanism that are not in place to hold the Congolese elites accountable, to hold the Rwandan government accountable, to hold key actors in the region accountable for what they have been doing in destabilizing the Congo. So that news of massacres, of displacement, should make the world pause in itself, right? But there is more. The world is not pausing. Obviously, the world continue to goes, and it's actually funny that the DRC now has a seat at the UN Security Council. But like I was mentioned during those games, and that was the image. And if you look at what has been making the headlines, besides the scores, besides the goals, besides the beauty of the game, what has been making the headlines outside of the soccer game that we love so much, the sport, and then the US is about to host the World Cup this year. Um, it was this image that I meant that I showed earlier with uh, this Congolese supporter, right? And if somebody can provide the names in the chat, that would be really amazing. I'll be really great to know his name. Let me actually Google that. Um, if can Kuka Muladinga. There you go. That's his name. Kuka Muladinga. That's his name. And just dressed like Lumumba, like I mentioned, standing essentially motionless throughout the entire game, just so that he can show that remind people of who Lumumba is, standing besides the Congolese people, standing besides the country, right? And no chance. He's not chanting. He's not celebrating. There is no distraction at all. Just standing, right? And that itself, and very particularly in the month of January that we are right now, it's not full football random. And I think, and that's why he's making all the headlines, and that's why people are talking about him. And actually, his name, and I'm seeing here, is Lumumba Vea. Uh, you see, yeah, just to trying to mimic Patrice Lumumba to show deep national pride and honor for his country. But this, I will even say, is a political expression, because Lumumba stood for something. And I had a conversation with a brother earlier regarding regarding organization that organize around the Congo, and whether or not those organization stands for the same values that Lumumba stood for, right? When you think about Pan-Africanism, what comes to mind? When you think about sovereignty, what comes to mind? And he, as a fan, I won't say that he is frozen, right? Because he's standing still, but he's standing on top of a Congolese flag. And I've heard people, online say that, oh, how dare he can stand on the flag. I was like, y'all don't understand the significance of what he's even doing, because he's rooted in the country. That's when I see that, that's what I understand. And that's what he communicates to me as a fellow Congolese, right? As his fellow Congolese. And we are still, here, that he represents people who are still here, people who are still fighting for the Congo. He represents uh, the people who still remember who they are, or who they are promised to be, right? And that's also significant in the national anthem, the Congolese national anthem. Who are we promised to be as Congolese, and what are we called to do for our nation to rise, debout Congolais, to rise as Congolese, right? And so, yes, we love the games and everything, but I think that is also important. So we're not fooled by everything. We're not distracted. Yes, distraction is good, soccer, but really the significance of having that image being showcased in different uh, 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 social media accounts, that football can indeed become a stage where dignity essentially can resist erasure. When people are forgetting about the Congo, he's reminding y'all, he's reminding us about the Congo. He's reminding y'all, he's reminding us about Lumumba and what Lumumba stood for. And I said that earlier, right? So, African nation, great. Um, but the significance behind it, that it's an opportunity, it's a platform for people to express themselves, play a game, and also remember or remind folks what the Congolese people are going through. And despite what the Congolese people are going through, they are still resilient, right? So the African Cup of Nations is not just a sport in that regard. It is also a matter of national survival in public view, right? And and to the question of going back to the question of what does Lumumba really represents, and I'm going to reiterate that he represents the sovereignty without permission, that it is your lands, it is your home, it is your minerals, your resources. You do not need permission for that sovereignty. He represents uh, freedom, not conditioned. Freedom or liberation, I will say, because there is a difference between freedom and liberation. That liberation to be conditioned and not approved. And that's why Lumumba, in that speech, he wanted to make sure to remind folks that the independence that we are getting June 30th, 1960, it is not something that was given. It was not something that was given. And let me see if I can read in English his speech. Um, very powerful speech. Men and women of the Congo, victorious independence fighters, I salute you in the name of the Congolese government. I ask all of you, my friends, who tirelessly fought in our ranks to mark this June 30th, 1960 as an illustrious date that will be ever engraved in your hearts, a date whose meaning you will proudly explain to your children, so that they in turn might relate to their grandchildren and great grandchildren that the glorious history of our struggle for freedom. Although this independence of the Congo is being proclaimed today by agreement with Belgium, an amicable country with which we are on equal terms, no Congolese will ever forget that independence was won in struggle, and persevering and inspired struggle carried on from day to day, a struggle in which we were undaunted by privation or suffering and stinted neither strength nor blood. It was filled with tears, fire, and blood. We are deeply proud of our struggle because it was just and noble and indispensable in putting an end to the humiliating bondage forced upon us. That was our lot for the 80 years of colonial rules, and our wounds are too fresh and much too painful to be forgotten. We have experienced forced labor in exchange for pay that did not allow us to satisfy our hunger, to clothe ourselves, to have a decent lodging, or to bring up our children as dearly loved ones. Very important part right now. Morning, noon, and nights, we were subjugated to jeers, insults, and blows because we were Negroes. Who will ever forget that the black was addressed as tu, not because he was a friend, but because the polite vous was reserved for the white man? We have seen our land seized in the name of ostensibly just laws, which gave recognition only to the right of might, just like today, right, with Rwanda. We have not forgotten that the law was never the same for the white and the black, that it was lenient to the ones and cruel and inhumane to the others. We have experienced the atrocious suffering, being persecuted for political conviction and religious beliefs, and exiled from our native land. Our lot was worse than death itself. We have not forgotten that in the cities, the mansions were for the whites and the tumble down huts for the blacks. That the black was not admitted to the cinemas, restaurants, and shops set aside for Europeans. That the black traveled in the hold under the feet of the whites in the luxury cabins. Who will ever forget the shooting which killed so many of our brothers? Or the cells into which were mercilessly thrown those who no longer wished to submit to the regime of injustice, oppression, and exploitation used by the colonialist as a tool of the domination. All that, my brothers, brought us untold suffering. But we, who were elected by the votes of your representatives, representatives of the people, to guide our native land, we who have suffered in body and soul from the colonial oppression, we tell you that henceforth all that is finished with. The Republic of the Congo has been proclaimed, and our beloved country future is now in the hands of its own people. Brothers, let us commence together a new struggle, a sublime struggle that will lead our country to peace, prosperity, and greatness. Together we shall establish social justice and ensure for every man a fair remuneration for his labor. We shall show the world that the black man can do when working what the black man can do when working in liberty. And we shall make the Congo the pride of Africa. We shall see to it that the land of our native country truly benefits its children. We shall revise all the old laws and make them into new ones that will be just and noble. We shall stop the persecution of free thoughts. We shall see that we shall see to it that all citizens enjoy to the fullest extent the basic freedoms provided by provided for by the Declaration of Human Rights. We shall eradicate all discrimination, whatever its origin, and we shall ensure for everyone a station in life befitting his human dignity and worthy of his labor and his loyalty to the country. We shall institute in the country a peace resting not on guns and bayonets, but on concord and goodwill. And in all of this, my dear compatriots, we can rely not only on our own enormous forces and immense wealth, but also on the assistance of the numerous foreign states whose cooperation we shall accept when it's not aimed at imposing upon us an alien policy, but it's given in a spirit of friendship. Even Belgium, which has finally learned the lesson of history and needs no longer try to oppose our independence, is prepared to give us its aid and friendship for that end an agreement for that end an agreement and has just been signed between our two equal and independent countries. I'm sure that this cooperation will benefit both countries. For our part, we shall, while remaining vigilant, try to observe the engagements we have freely made. Thus, both in the internal and external spheres, the new Congo being created by movements will be rich, free, and prosperous. But to attain our goal without delay, I ask all of you, legislators and citizens of the Congo, to give us all the help you can. I ask you all to sink your tribal quarrels. They weaken us and may cause us to be despised abroad. I ask you all not to shrink from any sacrifice for the sake of ensuring the success of our grand undertaking. Finally, I ask you unconditionally to respect the life and property of fellow citizen foreigners who have settled in our country. If the conduct of these foreigners leave much to be desired, our justice will promptly expel them from the territory of the Republic. If, on the contrary, the conduct is good, they must be left in peace, for they too are working for our country's prosperity. The Congo's independence is a decisive step toward the liberation of the whole African continent. Our government, a government of national and popular unity, will serve its country. I call on all Congolese citizens, men, women, and children, to set themselves resolutely to the task of creating a national economy and ensuring our economic independence. Eternal glory to the fighters for the national liberation. Long live independence and African unity. Long live the independence of a sovereign Congo. He was killed because of what he stood for. Because he stood for not an independence conditioned on approval. Very beautiful speech. Not friggin' negotiated behind closed doors, but sovereignty rooted in the people. And you saw in the speech, you heard it. Lumumba did not ask Belgium how to govern the Congo. He knew what was good for his people. He did not ask Washington how far dignity could go. He certainly didn't ask Paris. And for that, because of that independence of mind, that independence or that courage of daring to make a reality of free Congo, he was labeled dangerous and he was assassinated. So Lumumba represents here the original sin of the Pan-African independence. The belief that African state could choose without alignments, right? And even Kwame Nkrumah said, I'm neither choosing east nor west, I'm choosing forward. He did not want to align with any powerful country, not with the Soviet Union at the time, certainly not with the United States. So standing dressed as Lumumba in today's context of the Congo, right, is really an act of defiance. Because that fan is telling the world that the Congo did not forget Lumumba. And he certainly did not forget what happened to Lumumba, who killed Lumumba, and why he was killed. That the Congo, yes, is watching the game, but the Congo also understand the game, the geopolitics, that showed today, right, that the president of Venezuela was arrested. And I will talk about, and y'all maybe will be able to understand the connection with the Congo. That people wake up with news of a bombing happening in Caracas, the capital of Venezuela. And a few hours later, we are told that the president of Venezuela is under US custody. And why is that? According to the attorney general, that he's being charged for drug trafficking, right? Allegedly. He's facing federal drug trafficking charges, allegedly. But it's important to know a few things about something that folks seems to be forgetting, because it is the same thing when you want to address Congo's crisis. What do we use as Friends of the Congo? We first use the established laws that are in the book. We use international law. We use the UN Charter. And what does those international law even say, right? About international law. Let me see. And it's very important. And that's why I think it's going to be also decisive for the case of the Congo. Because The Congo right now, as I mentioned, is being occupied. It's territory bigger than Rwanda, right? It's being occupied right now. The Rwanda Defense Force, after taking over a few years ago, Bunagana, to taking over a year ago, the city of Goma, then Bukavu, in a blatant violation of international law. International law that is very clear about the sovereignty of a nation. And the same law that has been disregarded in the case of the Congo, the same law that has been disregarded in the case of Palestine, the same law is being disregarded in the case of Venezuela. You see. And let me see, I'm trying to put this one. Article 2 of the United Nations, and that's, you can find it online. And he says right there, Article 2.4, all members shall refrain in their international relation from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations. That's right there. The first thing that you read on when it comes to international law. What as the law says regarding the territorial integrity of a country. And no matter who is powerful, and that's why this law even exists, right? So that it's not the law of the jungle, where it is the most powerful country that decides. At least that's not how things are supposed to be. But that's how things are today. And I'm trying to do this, show another interesting. And this one, if I go on page 3, about the immunity of a state officials from foreign criminal jurisdiction, because again, going back to this tweets or whatever you're going to call it, the US president, the United States of America has successfully carried out a large-scale strike against Venezuela and its leader, President Nicolás Maduro, who has been, along with his wife, captured and flown out of the country. This operation was done in conjunction with US law enforcement. Details to follow. There will be a news conference today at 11 a.m. Mar-a-Lago, and there is also a clips that I have there about what to expect from that. And from the attorney general, and I think I mentioned and I showed this one, it's like he's facing is in New York, facing federal charge allegedly. Drug trafficking. When at the same time the former president of Honduras was pardoned by Trump last month, convicted of bringing 400 tons of drugs in the United States, but he was pardoned. But you're gonna fly into a different country, bomb that country, go into that person's bedroom because they said they were taken out of the bed with their wives, to bring them in the US so they could face federal charges. And before people start attacking me, I'm not saying that Nicolás Maduro is a good leader. I'll be speaking about him and how even he got to power in shortly. But I wanted to show that this action itself of the United States doing is in direct contradiction to the international law that the US helped create. Because what does this law says about the immunity of the president or a president of a country? Mind you that Paul Kagame, who's on the 2008 indictment from the Spanish court, and then we talked about this in this show. I talked about this in this show. There was an indictment that was available out there, and you could go ahead and read. Friends of the type just on Google, Friends of the Congo Spanish indictment. You will see that indictment. 40 military officers of Rwanda, including the president of Rwanda. But this it says in the indictment that they could not do anything about the president of Rwanda because he was the head of state. And I want to agree with that point, right? Because it is following what we read here. Article 3, persons enjoying immunity ratione personae. Heads of states, heads of governments, and ministers for foreign affairs enjoy immunity ratione personae from the exercise of foreign criminal jurisdiction. Heads of states, heads of governments, and ministers of foreign affairs enjoy immunity only during the term of office. Maduro is the sitting president of Venezuela. Such immunity covers all acts performed whether in private or official capacity by heads of states, heads of the government, and minister for foreign affairs during or prior to their term of office. The cessation of immunity is without prejudice to the application of the rules of international law concerning immunity, ratione materiae. Article 4. So you're going to tell Congolese people today that they are not able to get justice with Paul Kagame because he's the head of state. But at the very same time, the United States is going to fly to Venezuela, bomb Venezuela, capture the president of Venezuela, and bring him back home. Where in New York, the headquarters of the United Nations. I'm telling you, that's the end of international law. Because the president of Russia can be like, wow, I could have done that with Zelensky in Ukraine, right? The president of China could also say the same. Wow, I could do that with the president of Taiwan, with Taiwan. Sorry, I'm not sure they have a president there. Probably the prime minister or some sort of delegates. Not sure what's the political system in Taiwan. So, can you imagine the situation where we are heading toward that we are right now? Because this image speaks volume. Because let's talk about Maduro. And I said that I'm not supporting him. And I've said in the tweets that he's a dictator. Actually, he's serving a third term. I do not believe in dictators. When you start needing a third term, when you start lying, when you start cheating, even in the election, you're probably not the leader that the country needs, that the people need. So you can still be an anti-Maduro and pro-democracy and still be against military intervention. The two can coexist. You can condemn the human rights violation happening in Venezuela. You can condemn the human rights violation happening in Rwanda and still be against military intervention. You can still be against the human rights violation committed in the Congo, committed by current President Tshisekedi in the Congo, and still be against foreign intervention. Literally. So Maduro did not just woke up and became president. I think it was a whole system that was created around him, and before that was put in place by Hugo Chavez. A system really rooted in electoral processes that, from the starts, you know, were, I would say, recognized internationally. His first election was in 2013. I'm not going to speak much about that. But his second election, I think it was in 2018. In 2018, almost at the very same time that the Congolese president, Tshisekedi, had also been declared winner of a fraudulent election. And the person who declared him the winner is right now leading the M23, Kone Nanga. So how do you explain to me that these two leaders put in place these chaotic elections, these facade of elections, just to check the box that they are a democracy? But the West is going to bark at Venezuela and not Tshisekedi. So facts here is important because Maduro, again, his first election, and even the second, in a really timid way, right? Like the international communities were super shy, but they still recognize that de facto he's the president. Accepted by the United Nations because when there is the General Assembly meeting, he's there speaking on behalf of Venezuela, recognized by multiple states, including Western ones, treated as a legitimate leader. So were these elections perfect? No. Were the election in Venezuela perfect? No. Were the election in Venezuela contested? Absolutely yes. But the uncomfortable truth here is that Maduro's election, the second one, was initially accepted. And if you have to contrast that with the Congo, with Felix Tshisekedi who came to power, like I mentioned, observers openly questioned that. Domestic tallies were never transparent published. I remember in Goma, they were still counting. They still had ballots closed, sealed, but they were already providing the results. Corneille Nanga, who's right now the leader of the M23, was live on the RTNC, the national television, was publishing the results. The people themselves continue to contest. Yet we roll the red carpet for Tshisekedi. Red carpet rolled for Felix Tshisekedi. And in case y'all don't know who's Felix Tshisekedi, let me see if I can put it out there for y'all to see. And they met up with him. They invited him to conferences, international gathering, recognizing the man as the president of the DRC, signing agreements, and even after he got his second term in 2023 with over 70% elected, allegedly. So the comparison with the Congo is very important here because I mentioned that the Congo is involved because the way this could happen again is a really grave violation of international law. And then actually the vice president of Venezuela and I think the governments or whoever are in place, not sure if they're even in the country, Colombia also called for an emergency meeting at the UN Security Council. Guess who's non-permanent member at the UN Security Council? The Congo. So I am curious to know or to see what will be the votes of the Congo at the UN Security Council. Are they going to condemn this grave violation of international law, the violation of the Venezuelan territorial integrity, or are they going to abstain and let the US be? Or are they going to vote no and literally side with the US? But I think that an abstention in this point, like abstaining or voting no, is the same vote, right? So both elections, Congo and Venezuela, were both marred by irregularities, frauds. So no one here should get a pass. Tshisekedi shouldn't get a pass, but he did. Only one leader got sanctioned, isolated, indicted, targeted, bombed. And I'm not advocating for violence, never. But I'm also just showing the double standard here. Because we have to ask ourselves, is that a democracy or is it an alignment? Are we believing in law? Because the democracy is not just the power of the people, but power of the people rooted in law, in justice, in equity. And when you have articles, when you have laws in the books that mention all of these things, that mention sovereignty, that mention the territorial integrity of a country, and you're still gonna go ahead and ignore those laws, is it a democracy or is it alignment? Because when the US indicts, when the powerful indicts and arrests a sitting head of state unilaterally, that is not enforcing law. That is violating the law that I showed earlier. That is violating Article 2.4 of international law. That is violating the Chapter 6 of immunity of states. It really redefined the power as legality. So now, right, whoever is powerful, we have the legality to do whatever they want because they are the one who make the law anyways. So that raises a dangerous question for today's lives is who decides when sovereignty ends? And when does law become a weapon? And why are some contested election tolerated while others are just criminalized? Why are we going to allow a leader in the heart of Africa to steal the will of the people, maintain himself in power in defiance of every law, of international law, of, of the constitution of that country? But we are going to stand firm and criminalize the exact same act in other country, and we all know why. That selective justice does not strengthen international law, the balance that we need for peace, or should I say justice. It destroys the trust that people have put into the UN body. And that's just and simply a collapse of international law, a collapse of diplomacy. Because now we are going to rely on the fact that the powerful dictates what will be the next step, what will be the fate of a leader. And that's why the UN, the United Nations halls may be empty or may empty themselves pretty soon. And that's why a leader will most likely hesitate to travel in the US. And that's why Lumumba still speaks. And for people who know and who understand the struggle that the Congolese people are going through, the values that Lumumba stood for, the question will remain the same. From Congo to Venezuela, from the football stadiums to the UN halls, the question remains the same. What is sovereignty at the end of the day? What does it mean to be free? What does it mean to be liberated? Who gets to choose who gets free? Who gets to choose who gets liberated? Who gets punished? Who gets protected? And why? That Congolese fan dressed as Lumumba answered without words. He stood. And as long as people stand for ethics, for justice, for memory, for dignity, for truth, selective justice or the double standard will never be the final word. Never. And this is why it's very important that no matter the situation that we are in, the geopolitics that is unfolding in front of our eyes, that we do not forget the struggle that the Congolese people are facing. It is the struggle of any other oppressed nation, whether it is in Africa, in the Middle East, or Latin America. Stay tuned on Congo Filtered for our next episodes. Friends of the Congo, follow us. Subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube. Follow us on Instagram, Congo Friends, on X, Congo Friends. And stay tuned for the events, the next events, because like I mentioned earlier, for the next several days, we'll be diving into the work of Lumumba and what he stood for. Until then, that was Gaetan. I was your host for today's episodes. And once again, Happy New Year to y'all. And I will catch you later.